I've basically just been really excited to talk to you because of the work that you're doing with plant-based cat and dog food now, isn't it? That we're looking
Yes,
at.
it is. Yeah.
And I've heard you on a few podcasts and read some of your publications, and it's just absolutely fantastic work.
It's a really exciting space to be in. I think it's the most exciting area within the vegan movement at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. It's just I know some of the statistics that I've heard you quote about. I mean, sort of obviously there's the obvious thing of the animals being abused for the meat, but the environmental impact of that is astonishing. I saw some stats that you published about the land use just for dog and cat food, and it's absolutely shocking the amount of land that's used just for our companion animals.
Yeah, I have an infographic that I had some designers make to summarize the key results of my environmental study last year, which sort of lays the results out very simply. And it shows that if all the world's pet dogs were transitioned onto nutritionally sound vegan diets, we would save more greenhouse gases than emitted by the entire United Kingdom. In fact, it'd be about 1.5 times the UK's emissions would be saved. There'd be vast amounts of land and fresh water that would be saved, and many millions of additional people could also be fed with the food energy savings. So if dogs were to transition, that would be 449 million additional people, which is larger than the human population of the UK. And if all the world's pet cats, were to transition onto nutritionally sound vegan diets, you could feed the entire human population of the United Kingdom with the food energy saved. So there are paradigm shifting environmental benefits in this field, which we haven't realized previously, because when we've considered that dietary change is important towards plant-based diets, more sustainable diets to address the challenges of climate change and environmental destruction, we've always assumed that meant human diets. But what my study shows is that actually a good chunk of that is due to pet diets. That's not surprising when you bear in mind that a medium-sized dog will often consume as much meat as an average person. A large breed dog could well be more than that. And the use of animal byproducts in pet food is only part of the ingredients that are used. And they actually have a bigger environmental footprint, not a smaller environmental footprint than human-grade meat components when you do the studies. So globally, it looks like 9% of all consumption of food animals is for pets, not people. And in wealthy nations with high pet ownership, such as the US and probably the UK, it's at least 20%. So we've made a big mistake by assuming that this only relates to human diets and leaving pet diets out of environmental considerations and the considerations around saving food animal lives from slaughter each year.
It's just staggering, isn't it? It's terrifying, really, that statistic. And you mentioned there that the byproduct that's used in pet food is just as bad as the meat part as
It's
well.
actually worse. It's actually less efficient to produce animal byproducts than to produce human-grade meat. And that's because to produce equivalent quantities, you need to kill more average livestock animals to produce byproducts, because a smaller proportion of the carcass produces animal byproducts than human-grade meat. People often think that using byproducts is beneficial recycling of parts of the animal that would otherwise go to landfill, and that using them in pet food lowers the environmental impacts of pet food. That's not true, and it seems to be a narrative that was probably generated by the meat-based pet food industry a long time ago. And it has been studied in the past and found to be untrue, but hasn't really got a lot of attention. And that came up as a strong feature of my recent study, which has been widely reported. So the truth is that animal byproducts of human food production, the parts of the animals that people wouldn't normally consume, never go to landfill. They're used by a wide variety of other social sectors, fertilizers, pharmaceutical industry, household and industrial products. Only about a quarter of all animal byproducts end up in pet food. Use in pet food increases competition for them and drives up the price of them slightly. if they weren't used in pet food, the price of them would fall slightly, and they would still be consumed by all other social sectors that use animal byproducts. So it's something that affects the price, but it's certainly not beneficial recycling of things that would otherwise go to waste. They wouldn't go to waste. They're simply another part of the animal that generates money. It could be 10%, depending on the sector, generates money for the animal slaughtering industry. These ingredients are used in pet food, not because they're good quality, but because they're much cheaper than human-grade meat. They simply lower the cost of production, increase profits. They're also not all of the animal-based ingredients in pet food. Only about half of the animal-based ingredients in pet food are actually animal byproducts. The rest are human-grade meat and similar animal-based ingredients. So if you were to swap out the animal byproducts, which certainly isn't beneficial recycling of products that would go to waste, if you were to swap those out and use human-grade meat instead in pet food, two things would happen. One is the price would go up substantially because it's more expensive to produce that. Secondly, the environmental impact would fall substantially because you'd be having to kill less livestock animals to produce the human grade meat. Producing animal byproducts increases the number of livestock animals you need to kill by 1.4 for dog food and 1.9 for cat food. So it nearly doubles the number of animals used in cat food. So there you go. That's the truth about animal byproducts. They're not beneficial recycling of things that would go to waste, and they substantially increase the environmental impacts of pet food and also the numbers of animals that are killed to produce it.
It's just crazy, isn't it? It's so back to front. The whole, I mean, our food system's back to front, but that is just, and I think there are so many people in the vegan community that have rescue dogs. In fact, I was talking to someone this morning what I would consider, she's a fantastic vegan, and she does so much outreach, and her dogs aren't on plant-based pet food. And for me, that's a massive disconnect. I don't understand when they are readily available. I sort of don't understand it, but I think going back to sort of my pre-vegan days and when I used to work in practice, the understanding of what actually goes into any pet food, it's just not there anyway. The consumers are completely blind to it. Not always through their own ignorance, but just because the pet food manufacturers don't have to. The ingredients on the back of pet food are fairly wishy-washy, aren't they, with a lot of them? And there's just no education on it really. How do you feel about vegans having pets? Sort of, I know a lot of vegans tend to have rescue, and I know it's a really big question to throw on you, but what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, there are pros and cons, aren't there, from the animal's perspective? On the one hand, um, we remove animals often when they're very young from their natural families, which is a huge impact to inflict upon any social animal. And we place them in our own homes. We subject them to surgical procedures without their consent to prevent them from breeding and contributing to pet overpopulation. We control what they eat, where they go. So there are these massive restrictions that we place upon them, and unasked for alterations of their anatomy, their diets, their behaviour, and so on. On the positive side, we provide them with shelter and a regular supply of food. If they had been ancestral dogs and cats in the wild, yes, they would have had access to their natural families and complete freedom, but they also would have had challenges of potential malnutrition or starvation, and they would have had to compete for resources and so on. So, which is better from the animal's perspective? It's a hard call, but one insightful way to answer that question might be to ask, what would you want for yourself if you were a young human and you had those two choices in front of you? I think most of us would choose to take our chances with our natural pathways into the future rather than effectively live in a gilded cage, which is not always that gilded, depending on how well people look after their animals. Nowadays, of course, there is a world in which there's a lot of pet overpopulation in many countries. So neutering operations can help to bring down pet overpopulation, preventing more unwanted animals from being born and then killed prematurely in shelters, for example. In the meantime, we've got lots of cats and dogs that do need homes whilst time passes and hopefully the population falls, and there are less need for people to look after pets in the future. In the meantime, we've got lots of dogs and cats that do need homes, and especially those that don't currently have good homes, that are in animal shelters and rescue centres. So I think it's a fantastic service for anyone that has the opportunity and doesn't have a better way to spend their resources, to go and actually adopt some of those animals and look after them and give them a good home, but also ensure that they are neutered so that they can't produce more puppies and kittens and further exacerbate the problem of pet overpopulation. That's a long answer to a short
Yeah.
question.
I don't think there is a short answer to that question, is there? Absolutely. And I think a little bit like our culture, Western culture of eating meat, I feel that the privilege of, well, I deserve an animal, I deserve a companion animal, or it's the right thing to do to have a companion animal. That's certainly something that now it's the norm, isn't it, to have that privilege of, and we could go into all sorts with that, with sort of the cost of veterinary medicine and all sorts that they feel that they shouldn't have to pay, and there's a huge thing around it. But this absolute privilege of, I'm a human, I need a dog, it doesn't seem deemed a luxury anymore, it, not that I'm suggesting they're a luxury product, but that's kind of how they're certainly when they're bred, that's how they're put out there, isn't it? And
Well,
yeah,
they
so
are luxury. I wouldn't say product, but luxury acquisitions, because as societies develop, they have a lot more disposable income, and as that occurs, they tend to acquire many more companion animals, and pet ownership rises dramatically. So that's currently occurring in countries such as China that are developing. Pet ownership is already substantial and expected to significantly increase. With that, by the way, is a likely increase in consumption of pet food dramatically in the future. We're in a world in which 3 billion people are consumers in the developing world whose disposable incomes are increasing, and they're increasing their pet ownership, broadly speaking. So there's a huge potential out of a global population of 9 billion people on the planet. There's a huge potential for growth in pet ownership globally. And with that will be a huge increase in consumption of pet food, much greater than the increasing consumption of human food by the human population, which is not going to grow nearly as quickly. So the environmental impacts and the animal welfare impacts of killing animals in the food system to generate all that pet food are likely to climb much more quickly than they will because of changes in human diet in coming years. They're already large, and they're going to get much larger, which is why it's so important to think about a transition toward plant-based and other sustainable pet diets urgently.
yeah, it's terrifying. It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? I saw that recently, I think you were part of this, that the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons in Britain, they've changed their stance a little bit on plant-based diets, haven't they? Because I know several years ago it was a thing of, well, we absolutely can't recommend this.
Yes, the British Veterinary Association had been saying for years that they were opposed to the use of vegan pet diets. And so I had been offering to supply them with information that was ignored. So I had been stating in press interviews that their position was inconsistent with virtually all of the scientific studies in this field. It was outdated, and it was ignorant of the current scientific evidence, and also ignorant of the current landscape within vegan pet food, which has changed from people trying to make homemade diets for their dogs and cats, which are inevitably nutritionally unsound very often. And that was the case many years ago. What the BVA and many vets were not aware of was that modern pet food companies working with veterinary nutritional specialists have been developing vegan pet diets which are fully supplemented to ensure that they include all necessary nutrients for dogs and cats, and that these have been marketed for several years now. So they weren't aware of this complete change in the landscape of the field they were talking about. They also weren't aware of all the studies looking at health outcomes in dogs and cats fed these diets, and about environmental sustainability and behaviour and so on. And to be fair, most of those have only been published since 2021. So that's quite recent that they were not aware of it. However, they also have a duty to remain up to date and to provide positions which are consistent with scientific evidence and uphold animal welfare and also environmental sustainability as best they can. And they were manifestly failing in that duty. There is a little bit more to this story. The British Veterinary Association entered into a corporate partnership with Mars Pet Care, which is one of the biggest pet food companies in the world, which makes billions of dollars from selling meat-based pet foods, and would stand to potentially lose profits if vegan pet foods did well because they might lose market share. So the British Veterinary Association has a corporate partnership with Mars Pet Care. They receive financial assistance and other assistance from them, which they advertise on one of their web pages. So another point I made was that professional associations such as veterinary associations have a duty to not only have positions on issues which are evidence-based and up-to-date and in the interest of good animal welfare, but also not influenced by conflicts of interest. So anyway, having made these points publicly repeatedly, the British Veterinary Association finally stops expressing opposition to vegan pet diets and instead set up a panel to examine companion animal feeding generally, all sorts of alternative diets and broader issues such as pet obesity, which is a big problem with modern dogs and cats. And they spent many months looking at evidence and hearing from many experts and so on, and finally came out of with a new position, which is that they now support vegan diets for dogs, providing that these are formulated to be nutritionally sound. Their position statement and their report still had many inaccuracies and out-of-date positions, but at least they, begrudgingly it seemed, were finally willing to support vegan diets, providing that they were nutritionally sound, which of course they should always be formulated to be. That's a really important point. So anyway, it took an unreasonable amount of time and effort to drag them somewhat towards the modern understanding of this issue, but they finally got there with respect to dogs. So that's great. I do hope that they will stay open to further updating their position as more evidence continues to emerge in this field, and furthermore, that they'd be willing to reconsider some of their current outdated positions on other issues.
Yeah, thank you so much for the work you do. I mean, on when you said they were sort of with that with Mars Pet Food, that was the eye roll. I was just like, of course they are. Why would I expect them not to be? Like it's always the same, isn't it? You think, of course, it's just shocking. And yeah, for people that don't know, Mars Pet Food are probably are they the market? They're the biggest. They're one of the market leaders, aren't they? And have been for many many years.
They certainly are. They're
So
enormous, and they make vast sums of money from selling meat-based pet foods.
yeah. Have you yeah, typical, isn't it? Well, thank goodness you've made an amazing start to try and get this changed. Is what we really need. Have you any idea? I know it's a difficult thing to sort of to know, I suppose, but have you seen any evidence of how this is being um, taken on board by people in veterinary practice? What the stance is? Has it been well received, or do you think there are still so many vets and vet nurses that are still animal consumers that are just kind of like, no.
Yep, most veterinarians have been surprisingly open to receiving this information and updating their positions. I expect a lot more opposition than I've actually received. I spoke about this at one of the largest veterinary conferences in Europe recently, where there were 250 veterinarians, and as always, when I speak to virtually any audience, you see a sea of skeptical faces looking at you in the beginning, and by the end, they've completely flipped the other way because you just lay out the evidence, and it's so reasonable and rational, and the case is pretty much undeniable. So that normally happens, but there are a few that don't seem to get it. So this is the current week's edition of Veterinary Times, the main veterinary news journal in the United Kingdom. And on the letters page, we have this, which is a letter by a veterinarian, and he talks about so-called scientific reasons against vegan pet foods. And he goes on a bit of a rant talking about dogs being carnivores, not omnivores, which is incorrect. Talking about This is interesting. I've got to read this out. Your viewers, I'm sure, will enjoy this. He says, there are sound scientific reasons too numerous and complicated to explain here as to why plants cause harm when eaten by species other than those with fermentation areas within their digestive tracts. Um, and he says that there's quite a movement toward the carnivore diet in recognition that humans were hypercarnivores prior to agriculture establishing itself over the last few thousand years only, the start of which caused the human brain to reduce in size. And he then recommends a book called Why Vegans Have Smaller Brains and How Cows Reverse Climate Change. I Googled this briefly and I rapidly found a recent article on plant based news thoroughly debunking the ridiculous claims made in that book, which, by the way, contradict virtually all of the evidence in any related field, be it climate change, be it brain size, and so on. So there are occasional veterinarians that don't get it and have positions like that, which I found highly amusing to read. It's such a rich letter full of such ridiculous, unsubstantiated errors and extremist claims that one hardly knows where to begin in terms of responding to it. But I nevertheless did send in a response, so I hope that they will publish it. And
Yeah, I was gonna say for almost that's there's an issue with balance there in the Veterinary Times that they've got to do something to I don't know to present that with a bit of balance. Have they? Maybe I don't know. They're a bit of a law unto themselves, aren't they? But that's shocking, absolutely shocking. That yeah,
so it's an
it's
interesting
terrifying,
field
isn't
to
it?
be involved in. If you want entertainment, this is will provide it in abundance with letters contributions like that one.
Yeah, that's shocking.
But in
Just
terms of intelligent rebuttals, I have not come across any because there simply aren't. On the one hand, it just makes sense that if you provide a diet that includes all the nutrients and animal needs, but has fewer hazards, and the main ones would be animal sourced allergens for animals with dietary sensitivities or allergies, then you're likely to get health outcomes as good or better with a reduction in itchy skin, gastrointestinal problems, ear problems, which is exactly what studies show us. So it makes sense. And then there's all the studies actually testing this. And there are now 11 in dogs and 3 in cats showing equivalent or superior health outcomes when these diets are fed. There is only one study in dogs showing a contrary result, none in cats. The one in dogs is the oldest, smallest study with the least realistic study conditions. And there's also one systematic review of all scientific evidence that could possibly be relevant, which also supports the use of these diets in dogs and cats, providing they're nutritionally sound. So almost all of the evidence is strongly on side. It stands to reason. So I guess that's probably why there haven't been any intelligent rebuttals so far. I'm still waiting for one. In fact, in my reply to this veterinarian, I said, despite helpful summaries such as, for scientific reasons too numerous and complicated to explain here as to why plants cause harm, despite such helpful summaries, I'm still just struggling to understand what the problems are. And so I asked him, I said, look, perhaps I'm suffering from the brain shrinkage that apparently all humans have been suffering from since we moved to an agricultural rather than a hunter-gatherer diet thousands of years ago. So I said, look, I said, could this author please make it really, really simple for me by providing just a single study demonstrating the harms associated with vegan pet diets that he's broadly claiming, um, because in nearly 2 decades studying this field, I haven't been able to find one. And so I hope they will publish this.
I'm so glad you replied like that. Oh, what an idiot! Just what? Why? I mean, they're just showing themselves as foolish, aren't they? It's
Yeah.
just absolutely, it's absolutely
It's
shocking.
shocking what people will convince themselves is true if they have a financial interest in it or stand to significantly benefit in some way.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. We see that all the time, don't we? And I also think just people just don't want to change. I don't even think it comes from a place of laziness. People just don't want to change. They want to just stick with the old, and
It's a
it's
cultural phenomenon, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. Yeah. How do you think would be the best way? I know several. I was an RVN, so I know more nurses than vets that are going into practice now. And they get in touch and say, "Oh, you used to do this, and you're vegan," and they're vegans, and they're nervous about going into practice. Could you give any words of wisdom as to how they should best deal with these kind of conversations? I know, again, this is a massive question, but and I know we haven't got much time, but have you got any insight how they can deal
I
with?
mean, if a nurse is in a debate in a veterinary practice about vegan pet diets with other staff there, simply in the way that I've just explained it here, there's a large body of studies demonstrating equivalent or superior health outcomes. There are good reasons that make sense as to why those results should occur. And there's only one very unrealistic and small and old study showing a contrary result. Therefore, the evidence based position is clearly in favour of vegan pet diets, providing that they're formulated to be nutritionally sound. That means using responsible pet food companies who hopefully have been working with veterinary nutritionists to carefully design these diets to fully supplement them to make sure they're nutritionally sound. And I would say, that's the evidence-based position, and ask the opposition to provide any contrary evidence to support their position, because there isn't any.
That's brilliant. Do you think we'll get to see, any sort of professional development? Do you think we'll get to see this sort of evidence being brought as CPD for people in practice, going forward? Do you think
Yeah,
I mean,
I
it needs to be.
I've given a very limited number of talks to veterinary schools and to veterinary conferences. There's also a veterinary nutritionist in the UK, Dr. Mike Davies, who published one of the studies about health outcomes in dogs. He has a nutritional course that he runs every year for a couple of days, and he probably covers some of this information as well. So very little has been done so far. Much, much more should be done. I would love to do more personally, and also to work with colleagues. There are several vets in the UK who have established vegan pet food companies themselves, often because they've seen the benefits with their own dogs or in practice and want to scale that up to help many more people and pets. So I'd like to work with colleagues to provide many more of these presentations. I haven't had capacity to scale up yet. I'm just one person doing everything in my own organisation, but we really would like to scale this up. Yeah.
It's incredible what you've already done. I always feel that we all have the same 24 hours in a day, and then to see somebody that's doing what you're doing and has done so much in the last few years, it's incredible. So yeah, I would personally like to thank you so much, as a vegan and as a rescue dog lover and as a, you know, ex-RVN for all the work you are doing, because it's just so important. We really need to get this out there. It's absolutely incredible.
It's partly just with a lot of practice, you get really efficient and do things like spending zero time preparing for a podcast like this. My apologies. And I'm also grateful to my collaborators. I produce an annual report every year, and I, list my key collaborators in that. And I try to have a much bigger footprint than just one person. I've spent decades amassing a set of qualifications that make me one of the most highly qualified animal advocates globally. And the whole point is to put those qualifications behind campaigns to be able to support animal advocacy campaigns around the world. So I often do that, but I don't sink a lot of time into anything other than vegan pet food, because I think that's the way I can have the biggest impact at the moment. But I work with many other campaigns and organisations to try to support their work as well, and I end up with a much bigger footprint than just one person. But that's because so many other people are doing things that I'm involved with as well.
Yeah, it's great. The teamwork now in the vegan sector is just fantastic, isn't it? I love the fact that we need to solve this problem, reach out, and there's somebody there already working on it, or and that was certainly not the case 10 years ago. How do you feel? Do you have um optimism about the world? There's so much negativity, I think, in the vegan business sector, and just with day to day members of the public that are vegan. Do you have optimism? I'm really optimistic, so I'm always interested in what other people feel about this. Just with the way that the world is going, there's so much darkness, but I think that working together, we could make a huge difference, as you are already doing just with this. How do you see? Because you've been vegan a long time. How do you see things that have changed. Attitudes has obviously changed in many different ways. But do you feel like we're going in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, there is positive progress, which is great. As you say, veganism is much more obvious than it used to be in some parts of the world, certainly in the UK, for example. Uh, a few years ago, I went to New Zealand and worked there for around about a year. When I came back to Winchester, where I had been living, I found that even the steakhouse and the seafood restaurant had put on vegan options while I'd been away. I went into the I went into the steakhouse for a joke and asked them. I said to my friends on the footpath, "Stay here and watch this. This will be funny." And I went in and asked them about whether they could feed 4 vegans, and they didn't miss a beat. They explained to me about the vegan option on the menu in the steakhouse, and I had to say, "Well, thank you very much indeed. We'll consider this," and sort of sheepishly go back out and talk to my friends. so, So there has been progress, and there are parts of London where you walk and you can't help but trip over vegan signs everywhere you go, which is amazing. Of course, in other parts of the world, that's much less common. Um, am I an optimist? No, I'm a realist. I think it's not helpful to deny the reality of what's occurring with increasing human and pet population numbers, increasing livestock numbers that are being killed in the food system each year, and the increasing environmental impacts of all that, and the likely effects on the survival of most species on the planet. We are currently living through a mass extinction event, the sixth one since fossil records began. These are events when the majority of all living species die in a short period of time, and we're very much causing that by these sorts of activities, by the mass killing of animals in the food system, by the wholesale clearing of forests to create cropland to feed to livestock animals and to grave livestock animals directly. I don't think we do ourselves any service by denying that and denying reality. But I think what we can do is we can all look at our own lives and opportunities and resources available to us and think about the choices that we have. And you can maximize the achievements of your own life, the potential of your own life, and you can either do well or do badly. I think there's hope within that realm. And I think kind of that's the most important answer to the question of life. Life kind of is a question. You're on the planet. You have this opportunity. What are you going to do with it? And that's the biggest question of all. And I think probably trying to have the most positive impact that you can during your time here is the best answer that you can find to that question, and being the best person that you can be. And that doesn't necessarily mean working all the time and being serious all the time, because you'll probably burn yourself out, for one thing. But being the best person you can be and having the most positive impact that you can have, I think we can all have hope of achieving that or achieving the best that we can be, even if we can't realistically hope that the catastrophic consequences of climate change are going to be averted, or that the world's going to go vegan within the time frame that it needs to go.
Oh, I think that's a beautiful answer. It's yeah, it's spot on. That's what we all need to do. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's exactly what we need to do. Going back to I think something that I'm hearing a lot at the moment, going back directly to the pet foods again, with the cats, the whole thing about the cat food. I don't know how things are sort of where you are, but the one that gets bandied about online that I hear, and the ones that people quote to me when they're talking about cats going out and hunting birds and that being natural and all that kind of thing, is this whole taurine um, debate that's still going on, which is I thought had been debunked, but this is still what's been thrown at me about cats needing protein, and that the only way we can give them that is through supplementation in cat food. But to my understanding, meat cat foods are fairly highly supplemented anyway. Um,
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
meat-based cat foods and dog foods, for starters, are about 50% plant material. Most of it's dry food, and that's about 50% plant material. The rest is partially byproducts, partially human grade meat, with lots of additives. That will be supplements of things like minerals, vitamins, amino acids, as well as antifungals, antibacterials, preservatives, flavorants, and colorants. So all these supplements are routine within commercial meat-based pet food, the same sorts of supplements are used in pet food of any kind in order to ensure that they're nutritionally sound, that they won't degrade as much as they otherwise would within warehouses or be colonized by molds and bacteria and so on. Taurine is indeed an amino acid that cats require in a diet. Dogs don't. They can manufacture it from other precursors, but cats require it in a diet. Without taurine, they can be vulnerable to visual disorders, heart disorders, birth defects, and other problems. They will eventually suffer from those. Many of the meat-based nutrients are actually damaged or destroyed by high temperatures and pressures during processing of pet foods, and taurine is one of those. So it was found in the 1960s, I think, that cats consuming meat-based cat food were suffering from taurine deficiency because the naturally occurring taurine was being destroyed by the processing methods routinely used within pet food. So the problem was solved by supplementing meat-based pet food with synthetic taurine after processing, and the same synthetic taurine is used within vegan pet foods. So, once again, this concern comes from ignorance about the issue and it's misinformation effectively. And we see that in so many other areas where people try to oppose progressive positions, whether it be on the environment, on the impacts of the livestock sector, on climate change, or a multitude of other social issues. It's simply arises from ignorance about the reality of what's really going on.
Thank you so much for answering that. I know we joked earlier about not being prepared for podcasts, and literally that was one question that I wrote down. So I was like, I am sick of this argument. I just want an answer. Like, I'm sick of people coming at me about this with cats, and I'm just like, well, actually, my understanding is this, and it's already supplemented in it. And they're like, you don't know anything. Oh God, come on, just have
Yeah, the lack of knowledge of opponents doesn't stop them from having strong opinions sometimes about things they know virtually nothing about. And, we see this not just in the vegan pet food space, but across the political spectrum on a broad range of social issues. It's a common feature of society. So we have to, I suppose, continue to try and educate people in ways that are not off-putting to them, but they will find engaging. And the whole issue of human behavioural change and what strategies are effective and which ones are not is incredibly important and is a topic in its own right.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, especially when it comes to animals, it's just such an emotional, they're part of our family, aren't they? And it's such an emotional topic that you can argue with people about veganism, and as soon as you bring their pet into it, it's just, yeah, it's such an emotional thing.
It is. We actually have a chapter on human behavioural change within the recent textbook that I was one of the editors on. So this is the Routledge Handbook of Animal Welfare. It's been called a new Bible for the animal advocacy movement. It includes a very science-based chapter covering virtually every animal advocacy issue, whether it be the different systems for farming poultry, pigs, sheep, whether it be transportation, slaughter, companion animals, zoos, etc., etc., along with summaries of animal law in all the major regions of the world, along with key chapters on things like education, communication, human behavioural change, things like the rise of antibiotic resistance due to intensive farming, climate change, livestock, and so on. The entire thing is freely available on the internet if anyone's interested. So I designed it partly to be of assistance to the movement globally, because if activists are wanting a short summary, 5,000 words is not that short, of what are the actual animal welfare concerns associated with any particular topic. It might be hunting or whaling or farming systems of various animals and so on. This provides it. So it's kind of a bit succinct, heavily scientifically referenced, give people the ammunition that they need essentially for their campaigns. And there is, as I say, a chapter on human behavioural change. The entire book is freely available on the internet. The whole thing's been published open access. So I just want to plug that as well.
That's incredible. So we can just go on today and look for it and download it?
That's right. There's been more than 150,000 chapter downloads so far. It was published in 2023. And yes, it's freely available on the internet thanks to some generous donors who paid the very expensive fee to the publisher required to put it online, which of course cuts the sales of the book substantially, meaning that the publisher can't make much money from selling the book in a normal way, which is why they charge such high fees to open access publish. But it means that animal advocates can download the whole thing for free, or individual chapters as they choose. So we worked with about 50 experts from around the world in all of the different areas, be it pig farming, poultry farming, or whatever, to compile 36 chapters in the book, and it's all available there for anyone that needs it.
That's fantastic. That's I'm blown away by. Well, that's my bedtime reading for the next 3 weeks. That sounds really amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I really
Thank
appreciate
you very
it.
much indeed.